Millions of Russians have never felt war so deeply. Drone and missile attacks and sabotage activities have cast a darkness over Putin's country. Even the most important cities in Russia are occasionally targeted by the Ukrainian army. In recent months, flights in Moscow and St. Petersburg have been suspended repeatedly due to successive drone raids. Almost every month, the capital's surroundings have seen airspace closures, flight cancellations, low-altitude raids, and hits on critical infrastructure. This situation is not a one-night event, but has turned into a rhythm that repeats at regular intervals. It all started in mid-March with a chain of attacks that raised the bar in the capital. On March 11, 2025, Moscow faced one of the largest UAV attacks to date. Air defense activities intensified, some flights were suspended, and the city experienced a widespread night of alarm. Footage and local announcements that night showed that the raid developed not from a single vector, but from different directions and simultaneously. The combination of low-altitude and low-silhouette platforms engaged the layered defense. For those living around the metropolis, this was their first experience of a prolonged interruption under the sky. Immediately after the incident, although airports gradually resumed operations, the term night closure entered the agenda. After this date, the phenomenon we call the alarm economy in the capital became apparent. Sudden announcements during the evening rush hour affected the chain from transportation to logistics. That March night set a threshold for the rest of the year and reinforced the feeling of a repeatable pattern. In May, the pressures resurfaced, and civil aviation was directly affected. On May 6th, operations were temporarily suspended at multiple airports around the capital. Takeoff and landing flows were suspended due to risk assessments both around the runway and in the approach and departure corridors. Messages from airport announcements and city warning systems standardized the phrase, "waiting for airspace security." May 25th, a similar stop-start process occurred at airports in the Moscow region. Some aircraft approaching for landing were placed in a holding pattern, and departures were queued. From the perspective of an ordinary passenger, this was a stressful situation that occurred twice in 2 weeks and disrupted plans ahead of the summer season. These disruptions did not always reach the level of flights completely suspended, but each time they affected the schedules of hundreds of flights and the routes of thousands of passengers. For those living in the outer districts of the metropolis, the flight application alert became as much of an anxiety trigger as the sound of sirens. In June, the pressure intensity increased and the frequency rose. During the week of June 8th, flights were temporarily suspended again due to drone swarms around Moscow and St. Petersburg. On the 25th of the same month, the announcement that air defense had shot down 114 unmanned aerial vehicles demonstrated how much activity had increased nationwide. Such announcements drew attention not only because of the high numbers, but also because of the emphasis on multiple simultaneous regions. Each interruption around Moscow disrupted not only aviation, but also navigation services and driver applications in surrounding districts due to electronic warfare effects. Meanwhile, there is a donation campaign for Ukraine by United 24 in the video description. If you want to take part in the fight for freedom, we are waiting for your support. Now let's get back to our main topic. Periods when everyone experienced momentary location deviations on their cell phones became more frequent. They were felt briefly but across a wide geography. A common feature of the waves experienced in June was the reinforcement of the phrase, "Flights were suspended as a precaution," alongside the statement, "We destroyed them." In short, even though the defense was working, the absorption problem grew. The number of platforms hit increased, but shutdowns and delays also multiplied. In July 2025, the bar was raised to a higher level. It entered the Moscow Oblast, and energy nodes came to the fore as a risk class. On July 4th, a transformer station near Sergeyev Posad was damaged. The incident showed that the defense was not only focused on aerial vehicles, but also that the above-ground infrastructure layers, which needed to be protected in the final stage, had risen to the priority of detection and defense. The next day, it was announced that 4 more UAVs had been shot down around Moscow. These developments over 2 consecutive days forced operators in the capital's belt to adopt the concept of a backup plan. Practices such as generators, fuel stocks, relocation of critical IT rooms, and emergency lighting systems became part of everyday language. From the perspective of home users, short outages and neighborhood-based alerts became one of the main causes of heightened anxiety. Even if such incidents did not occur at night, they gave rise to a nighttime vigil. Because once the power came back on, everyone was fixated on the question, when will the next outage be? The first week of July was a turning point in this regard. By mid-July, the sheer scale of the numbers signaled a new threshold. On July 18th, flights were suspended at Domodedovo and Vnukovo due to drone attacks. On July 20th, it was announced that 117 of 142 UAVs had been shot down in a wave spreading across the country, and 27 unmanned aerial vehicles had been destroyed in the air in the Moscow region. These two dates showed that the stop-start practice, operated with the aim of protecting the capital's air corridors, had now become the new normal for the summer. Airlines turned their backup slot and alternative airport plans into permanent procedures. This scenario, which meant more surprises for high-season travelers, also meant increased delays in cargo and express transport. Business people and transporters took it in stride to revise their plans overnight. By the end of July, the question for city residents had become simple. How many days this summer passed without interruption? The answers turned into ever-growing lists on social media. By the end of August, the alarm peaked again, and operations at 3 major airports around the capital were simultaneously affected. On August 26th, successive shutdown decisions came at airports in the Moscow region. Rapid notifications were issued for ticketed passengers, while emergency route changes were implemented for crews. During the same period, fires and explosions in western regions such as Bryansk and Smolensk showed that attack vectors were being dispersed and that the defense had to shift resources to different geographical areas. This also necessitated the redistribution of part of the defense thickness around the capital to other critical points within the country. The conclusion for Moscow was clear. The layers are many, but the pressure is scattered and persistent. By the end of August, the statement, 3 squares around the capital could close overnight, had become a confirmed experience. This became the new normal not only for pilots and tower crews, but also for the city's transportation and ground services network. By early September, the picture had not changed, only the scale had expanded. On September 1st, totals such as 160 in a single night and 152 UAVs in the following days were announced nationwide. Some of these waves triggered airspace measures around the capital. Moscow was no longer safe for Russians. No-fly zones established around Domodedovo, Vnukovo, and occasionally Sheremetyevo disrupted daily life, accompanied by sudden announcements via apps. While official statements repeated the phrase, drones were destroyed, closed runways and rescheduled flights reminded Muscovites of a stark reality. The war was not far away, but right outside their homes. So why now? One aspect of the answer lies in the easing of political restrictions, another in Ukraine's development of long-range strike capabilities. Statements to the effect that there are no longer range limitations came from some European capitals, particularly Berlin, and these statements were met with strong reactions from the Russian side. This rhetoric indicates that the rulebook is beginning to change and that Ukraine's long-range capabilities are gaining broader legitimacy to target military objectives on Russian territory. At the same time, there are reports that Washington continues to impose selective restrictions on certain platforms, signaling a mixed period in which different capabilities from different origins are subject to different rules. It is also the practical result of the political brake being loosened. This weakens Moscow's assumption of capital inviolability. Data from the last 6 months suggests that the declaration has been translated into action. Closures have increased, and strike windows have narrowed. On the Ukrainian side, 3 topics stand out on the long-range front: domestic cruise missiles, the extended-range ammunition program, and the new generation of long-range drone families. First up is the Flamingo FP5. The land-launched cruise missile family introduced by Ukrainian company Firepoint was unveiled with an ambitious range claim of 3,000 kilometers. And this week, it was used for the first time to strike Russian military bases in Crimea. The range claim for the domestically produced ground-launched cruise missiles, known as Flamingo, in the 3,000-kilometer class and their warhead profile of over 1 ton, theoretically make deep target sets accessible. Although publicly available data on the production and use of these systems is limited, open-source interviews and news reports have outlined a mass production target and high-precision framework. The second ring is IRAM. The US has announced the approval process for the sale of 3,350 extended-range attack munitions, IRAM, to Ukraine. The definition is simple. Smart munitions launched from fighter jets, with a range of hundreds of miles, striking hard targets with pinpoint accuracy. The range turns air bases, radar nodes, and munitions depots deep within Russian territory into targets that can be taken into account overnight. It does not reach Moscow, and there are still US restrictions on striking inside Russia. But in terms of operational power, it changes the rhythm of the map rather than the sound of artillery on the front lines. The new long-range drone family, the third category, makes the long arm practical with its combination of multiple flight profiles and low-signature smart guidance. The most notable of these is the Palianitsia. It is described as a new-generation missile UAV architecture that is long-range and uses artificial intelligence-assisted guidance. The difference in a single sentence is significant. Low RCS, high autonomy, swarm coordination. Attention is drawn to the system's ability to learn in flight and maintain its course despite electronic jamming. The Kiev Post writes that the range step extends to the hundreds of kilometers class, and that when combined with other platforms, it can produce multi-target raids overnight. Read together, these three headlines imply that the technical basis for the alarm intensity seen around Moscow is becoming even thicker. Regardless of the origin and platform details, the result is the same. Long range is no longer a geographical term, but a planning term. The common denominator of this 6-month wave of intense attacks is low altitude, low radar signature, and a multi-axis approach. Technically, the layered air defense around the capital, Panzer Tor in the lower layer, Buk in the middle layer, S-300-400 in the upper layer, is struggling with simultaneous target absorption. Low-cost platforms continue to consume expensive interceptors. While an attack vector costs tens of thousands of dollars, interceptor munitions and radar operation can run into the hundreds of thousands. This asymmetry shortens the defense inventory's rest and replenishment interval, even after a few nights of heavy waves per month. Furthermore, multiple approach directions geometrically strain radar coverage, narrowing the early warning window. It appears that thickening the Moscow dome alone does not provide a solution, as the attack repertoire is expanding. The changing repertoire constantly engages the system's maintenance, ammunition, and watch triangle. This is reflected in the weekly city calendar as random alarms. At the political strategic level, the range debate on the European front is affecting the rhythm on the ground. The no restrictions approach articulated in Berlin-based statements, alongside selective restrictions on the Atlantic front, increases the source diversity of the long-range platform set. This means planning uncertainty for the Kremlin. It is becoming difficult to predict which platform will be used on which night. The defense threat profile estimation is spreading across a wider spectrum. On the other hand, the high destruction numbers declared by air defense, along with large-scale night waves, cannot answer the question, why did we wait again on the civilian side? Because civilians are not looking for technical proof. They are looking at the reason for the disruption in their daily lives. Therefore, it is becoming increasingly difficult for the official discourse to manage the contradiction between success and disruption. Social psychology is strained more by many small alarms than by one big explosion. Muscovites see the warnings in apps and instant city announcements, even if they don't hear the siren. The runway closed cycle, especially at night, affects morning commutes and evening return plans. Families have to factor in unexpected delays, even in ordinary routines such as getting children to school in the morning, workers getting to their shifts, and the elderly arranging appointments. This erodes the psychological buffer known as urban resilience in the long term. As predictability, a fundamental indicator of security, diminishes, people's perception of risk becomes permanent, even if the news is denied. The reduced announcement provides momentary relief, but the closed implementation leaves a lasting mark because it disrupts daily life. Over the past 6 months, Moscow residents have felt this dual reality every week. This situation also makes public communication more concrete and data-driven. In summary, the last 6 months have produced two parallel realities in Moscow. First, defense systems are working intensively and hitting numerous targets. Second, On the same nights, civilian life, flights, and infrastructure are frequently disrupted. When these two realities are read together, the conclusion is simple but harsh. The capital's security can no longer be measured solely by the number of targets shot down. The measure is how much the city's calendar has been disrupted, how much household and business behavior has changed. At a time when the range restriction regime has eased, the diversification of long-range capabilities and the normalization of salvo tactics have rendered the concept of distance meaningless for Moscow. Moscow is no longer safe, because safety is measured not by the silence of sirens, but by the calendar continuing to tick. However, Ukraine has already taken this option away from Russia. This is no longer a single drone story. It is the era of strategic access. As range constraints ease, Ukraine's Iram Palianitsia Flamingo set and long-range kamikaze family are rewriting the narrative of Moscow's security. Even if air defense works, the absorption problem is growing. Every night you experience a little more alarm economy. The scale of the map has changed, and capitals will now be included in every equation. As Ukraine's range and information superiority grows, Moscow's security is no longer a distant front issue. Every alarm is part of the capital's new normal. Thank you for choosing us.